Hello and welcome to the listeners of the This Month in Fintech podcast. I'm so happy that you could all join today. And I'm very excited to have our guest today, Ximena Aleman, co-founder and co-CEO of Prometeo. Hi, Ximena. How are you today?
Hi, Sasha. Nice to be here. Very glad. Thanks for having me. Happy to join this conversation.
Great. And where in the world are you dialing in from today?
Well, today I'm dialing in from my hometown, Montevideo, in Uruguay.
Awesome. I'm very excited that you're my first international guest. So looking forward to getting into what you do and also a little bit about what's happening in LATAM. So to kick it off, initially we met back in 2022 when I was on the investment team at Fin Capital. And having previously worked at Quovo and Plaid, I really liked Prometeo because you seem to be doing a really, really hard thing. When I was working at Plaid, I was in sales, and it was very easy to confidently say that Plaid has an API that does a really great job of connecting to consumer bank accounts across the US so that their clients can power a number of use cases. For example, people can authenticate their Wells Fargo, Bank of America, Chase account in order to connect to Venmo or Cash App and send money to their friends and family. Or consumers can authenticate their bank accounts in order to put money into their public.com, Stash, M1, crypto.com, Coinbase, or Betterment accounts. But when a prospect would ask if our API could connect to bank accounts globally, or if they could use our API to authenticate business and corporate accounts, I started to get nervous that I was going to lose that sale because it's really hard. So I'd love to hear from you as to how you got into this and a little bit about how it happens.
Well, I wouldn't say that how we got to what we are right now is completely straightforward, and I think it totally makes sense for Plaid to be US centric as it is, because the US is such a large fragmented market that, of course, it's broad enough, large enough. The thing is that, I always think that the context really frames how we see the world, and so I imagine that for Zach, building Plaid, it's of course US. But I was born in Uruguay. I'm based in Montevideo. We are 3.5 million people here, and so it's a very small market. My co-founders are also from Uruguay. We sit between Argentina and Brazil, for those that perhaps are not that familiarized with where Uruguay is in the world, but it's a really, really small market. And so my background is communications and marketing. And so somehow after an MBA, I got to the fintech space, and actually Prometeo is my third startup. But from the previous ones, the two previous ones with my co-founders, we understood the lack of API infrastructure in Uruguay, because the first two startups were more based to attending the local market problems. And then when we got to the idea of Prometeo, building this single API across countries, across financial institutions, it was very, we understood very firsthand that this was an issue in Uruguay, but at the same time, we understood very firsthand that this was an issue across countries, and because Uruguay is such a small market, it made sense to go pan-regional from scratch, and so we started thinking about Prometeo as this connectivity layer unifying financial infrastructures across countries, not just Uruguay or Uruguay and Argentina, which is like the Rio de la Plata space, or perhaps the South Cone, as you would say, with Chile, but actually thinking, okay, which are the problems across the region? and which are the things that need to be interconnected across the region, and so you have like in Latin America, like these global corporations coming to operate to LATAM, like as they operate across the globe. But usually when they think about LATAM, they are thinking about Brazil and Mexico, and that's it, or Brazil or Mexico, and that's it. Or perhaps Brazil, Mexico, and Colombia, and it's like it makes sense, it's sound how they are thinking about it because it's in terms of market share, but actually there are opportunities in more than 25 other countries, and so the idea was, what if we can take out the friction, if we can simplify the access to all of these markets with a swift single integration across them. And I would say that that was the insight that drove Prometeo since the beginning, like thinking about this as a single stop shop for IAP, banking API connectivity across the Americas. Initially Latin America bands, but since well, over the last 2 years we have been building product and connectivity across the US as well, because it makes sense. Again, we are in a very like it's two regions that are interconnected, very close, commercial wise, but at the same time it's still fragmented, and so it was the same logic all over again. We should unify.
Excellent. And for the listeners, so that we can bring it to life a little bit, can we talk about some of the clients and how they're using your API? So some really impressive logos on publicly on your website. So you're working with Citi, JP Morgan, Santander. Did they utilize your API so that their clients can auth vendors before transferring payments, or like how does the flow work?
Yes, so we work with large financial institutions and corporations, basically in the financial space. How we help them is through our API. They can automate access to informations, validation of accounts, and payments across the countries that where we operate. As you mentioned, we work with two of the five largest banks in the world. We also work with the largest consortium of financial institutions in the world. We work with most important financial companies in Latin America, with the Mexican ACH, with BCP, which is the largest bank in Peru. We work with Rappi, with Mercado Libre, like to tell some of them, but mostly trying to help them to automate the access to information and payments across financial institutions in LATAM and the US.
Excellent. And I know it's your secret sauce, and that's allowed you to like build this epic company that you have built. But thinking back to the days when I was at Plaid, and it was hard enough to connect to the 14,000 banks and credit unions within the US, let alone the international and corporate bank accounts, which is a whole different kettle of fish in terms of password type, MFA, etc. Can you give us a little peek behind the curtain as to how do you connect with these like bigger business accounts?
Yeah, and so I would say that coming from an emerging market, uh, you create like this DNA, which is very adaptable and flexible. And so I would say that's something that helped us out since the beginning, was that we were able to manage different types of connectivity in different countries with different financial institutions, and so we were very adaptable, and so let's go back to when we started 2018, back 2019 actually. There weren't open APIs across Latin America, okay, and so we were doing everything very centered around screen scraping, reverse engineering, and that was like the core of our tech capabilities, and we were excellent at it. Like I would say that it was one of the highlights of Prometeo, the capabilities that we have doing that. and that was, and they were very helpful because they turned us into a relevant player in the space back then, but then open banking appeared in Brazil, and it was such a success. And so all of a sudden we had like, okay, we can connect to APIs. So let's connect to those APIs. How fast can we integrate with these APIs? And so now we have the experience of APIs in Brazil, but we keep integrating in the other emerging markets through screen scraped integrations. But at the same time, like we have like these customers coming to us asking us to provide these use cases for them. And so we have uh, an increasingly large demand, and more traction and more volume. And all of a sudden, like, okay, we have this volume that we can offer to these companies, these financial institutions. So perhaps they are willing to open the API, their APIs for us, because this can become a new revenue stream for them. And so now we are knocking at the doors of the smaller financial institutions in LATAM, like the smaller ones, not the large ones, but the smaller ones, and telling them, okay, like this is coming, this is happening, and we have like all of these customers that are using our screen scraped, reverse engineered APIs. Are you willing to open your APIs for us? And some of them said yes, and so we were able to create like this virtuous cycle of moving the demand that we had from screen scraped APIs to open APIs, or not open like open banking APIs, but actually APIs that were open for us because they were closed, but the financial institution was willing to open them like a bilateral agreement. In some other cases, like we had like the consent to screen scraped from other financial institutions that didn't have like their APIs. They knew they wouldn't open APIs, but they said, okay, like I can somehow like certify your screen scraping, and so like, and all of a sudden, like we were having like these multiple layers of connectivity and supporting all of them. And that allowed us to have like the scale that we have been able to build.
It's really interesting that the things that have happened in the US are now happening in LATAM. So, like when I was early at Quovo, same story. We were using various methods to connect. Screen scraping was like a bit of a dirty word in the US, so we like tried to move away from that. But as the volume started and the banks were realizing this was a revenue stream for them and it was what their users were demanding, they started to open their APIs. But then where it was a smaller institution and they may not have a wealth yet, then they would whitelist us so that we could more easily get the data for our customers.
Yeah, yeah, I would say that talking with players from other spaces, like the same space but in other places, like you share same experiences. It's been like the same path from, I would say, for all of us, and it's yeah. It's always amazing to see like the same kind of experiences happening, despite like having faced the issues in very different regions with different capabilities and tech stacks, and like in Europe the experience is the same with players that are building API infrastructure. We've talked with well, other companies doing this since 2015 or so, and it's the same, and it feels curious.
Mm, it's exciting. It's opening a lot more opportunities. And switching gears now to your Series A. So huge congratulations. Led by Antler with participation from PayPal Ventures, Samsung Next, and others. Really exciting and impressive fundraise. So, like, I'm very, very happy for you. What was the fundraising process like for you? And it's a bit of a controversial statement, but do you think it would have been different if you were a
Very straightforward. Uh, okay. Okay. Let's get to it. I'll go over the process. itself, and then I'll address how I feel about the gender gap in funding, and how is to fundraise as a female LATAM based and CEO. Okay, so it was hard. It was very hard, the fundraise. Back when we started in 2020 to fundraise, actually, we were thinking about fundraising in the second half of 2023, and we closed a major deal at the beginning of 2023, like between the end of the year and the beginning of the year. And like all of a sudden, like the metrics were in a very, very good place. The year had closed very good, plus like this new deal, and like everything was starting to come around, like we knew that we were going to fundraise a Series A during 2023, but it was about like which was the better window of opportunity for us. And so like we started to have like this inbound from VCs, from players, like asking about metrics, and asking like I usually have like these sort of catch ups with different investors, just to be around and understand where they are and give them like a glimpse on where we are, which is sort of standard. And so I had a couple of these, and they were like really interested in what we were doing, and like they started asking for more information. And so all of a sudden, like it seemed like it was the time, and so we decided to let's do it right now. It was like a conversation with the other investors. Let's go, let's prepare the data room, the pitch deck, like let's have everything in place. And so this was perhaps early April, between March and early April. um, and then I kick off like the fundraise, but with this smaller list of, I would say, yeah, like um,
Your favorite
A
VCs that could
players.
add
Yes,
value.
the A players. And so we were like April, sending information, meetings, pitch, partners getting involved, like going, introducing customers. And all of a sudden, it was like the crypto winter, and everything like started to froze, and you could see like how everything was becoming like more delayed and more difficult, and like all of these players like saying no and starting to say like, okay, we are deciding not to move forward with new investments in LATAM, and like perhaps not now, like. And and so I had scheduled like a trip to New York, like to meet some VCs. And I met with one of my investors, like the Cometa led our Series A, our Series C. It's like, I would say, the most important fintech VC in Mexico right now. Great portfolio, symmetric, Conecta, Bit. So like they are great. I love them. Shout out to Cometa. But then like I was there, and we were having breakfast, and so Pepe, Jose Bolaños, he tells me like, Sime, I want you to understand that what we will do will be very, very hard. Like, you are now fundraising at the worst moment in the market for all of the ones that are working at this moment in this space. Like, this is the toughest time ever. And wow, for me it was like, okay, let's move on. Next meeting, and so yeah, yeah, we couldn't back down. It was and so we continued fundraising, and we had like great metrics. We were growing very, very good. Most of our revenue was coming from the US. Like it was from these very large customers, with great avenues of expansion into each of the accounts. And all of a sudden, like I was just getting no's, and it was one after the other, after the other. It was really hard. But at the same time, like I knew that I had something very, very valuable. Like this was a great asset. Like that's what I believe about Prometeo, but especially back then, like everything seemed like if this wasn't the context, there wouldn't be a no for this.
Totally. Yeah. I remember seeing your deck and the logos, the revenue, and I was like, in a different climate, this is a no-brainer for a Series A. But just really unfortunate timing that the crypto winter was happening. And during that time, a lot of VCs were like pulling back on risk in every type of the every sense. And unfortunately, back then, female fintech founders had 2% venture funding of the whole market, so very low. And then during that crypto winter, it went down to 1%. So we went backwards during that time. So it's even more impressive that you were able to raise. So congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. I remember seeing like that statistic, and it was like overwhelming, and like I remember feeling not that alone, like doing this against against all odds. Um, but yeah, I would say that by September, we were in a different place. Like we had already like signed the term sheets, and we moved on to the final phase of the round, which is documents and due diligence. And it turned out to be in a great place with great players backing us. Very happy about the outcome. It was tough, we needed to be very resilient and persevere on what we were doing, but we were able to do so. And then I would say to the second part of your question, which I think it's always there. I would say that, of course, I've had like different reactions to me. Some not as polite as I would expect, or like perhaps more gender driven. Like I would feel that there was an issue there. I wouldn't say that that's the case. Like that's not how I feel whenever I enter to pitch at a VC, like anywhere. Like not in Sao Paulo, not in Mexico or in Nueva York and San Francisco. That's not the case. But definitely, I think that there is a systemic problem, you know, and like we cannot not like we can. It's obvious. It's not something that we cannot recognize, like because the statistics are there, and because whenever I enter to a room, I can notice that I'm the only female. Wherever I go to like a large event involving investors, involving fundraising, dinners, like uh, I I would say that we are less than 10% always, and so the reality is there, and we get less funding, and what I would say that I've always been very like very or I've become more self-aware. It's about which are the small interactions that mm, provide less credibility, because I think that that's where the issue is right now. It's not about the company, it's not about the asset that you're it's not like they are not like they are not believing you, it's not about that. But I think that there are gender things, like about how the other person believes a CEO is embodied. If I see you, do I believe that you are the CEO that will push this company to a unicorn? And I think that that's the question where I struggle to answer. Like I don't know if I really portray for them that CEO, though I believe that I am the one. But it's like, which are the signals that embody that CEO, and if I can project that for them.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that a lot of it is unconscious bias. It's no one's fault. It's conditioning that we've had over, hundreds of years of seeing men be that billion-dollar CEO. And my belief is that there's a lot of things that are out of our control and that are slowly getting better as we progress as a society. But one of the things that's within our control is having more women around the investment committee decision making table. That's one of the reasons personally that I went and became a VC, um, so that I could back more women, and I backed 5 female co-founders over the 7 deals I did in 2 years at FinCapital. Um, but I would just really encourage everyone that's listening to get into venture if you are thinking about it and you're a woman, and please come to me if you would like any help, and if I could be helpful. Okay, great. So we don't have that much time left. So moving on to the LATAM fintech scene. So I lived in Mexico last year when I was changing over my visa in order to move back to New York, and New Bank was everywhere. And now I've seen that they're coming to the US, and I'm curious on your thoughts of how they're going to go. I'm just considering so many other international neobanks have tried the US. It's pretty timely considering there was a Wall Street Journal article last week that Monzo is retreating again from the US. N26 left. Revolut isn't doing that much here. So, do you think that Chime and Current are going to continue to be the dominant US players, or will Nubank have a chance considering that they can serve the Spanish and Portuguese speaking populations of the US?
And I think that that's the key, the Spanish speaking population. And I think that if they are able to replicate the success that they have had in Brazil, I have no doubts about their capabilities of execution. I think it's one of the fintech companies that have executed better consistently in Latin America for years. And what we see is the result of a very, very excellent execution, similar to Mercado Libre. Like the companies that made it, the LATAM companies that make it to IPO, they are wow companies, because it's not easy, and once that you are in the space, like trying to replicate that, and you witness how difficult it is firsthand, you create a level of admiration for those teams, those CEOs that are able to accomplish that. I think that having like the experience from David Velez and both Marcos Galperin, it's very epic, and I think that it's not epic just because of the result, but because actually they built very solid companies, and the customer support levels that Nubank it's recognized for, is because they've changed the expectation about financial institutions in Latin America across countries. Like they are widely recognized as excellence, as it's a brand that embodies customer support excellence, which I think is great. And so I think that many companies, like, they've become the benchmark for a lot of other companies in the space to try to replicate the NPS levels, the metrics that they have, which I think it's great for the ecosystem, because in Latin America, exactly, and customer support in Latin America in financial institutions has been always terrible, and so try to create like that sort of system, or being able to create that systemic change in the industry. I think it's amazing, and I think that there's space for them to do so in the US.
Any other LATAM fintechs that our audience should be aware of, especially if they expand to the US? That could be like a very good like opportunity for some of our listeners to maybe work at one of those. For
Prometeo.
example, D Local seems to be doing a lot. Yes, Prometeo, of course.
Prometeo.
I know you're hiring a sales role, so for the listeners, that's a huge opportunity. So much greenfield, especially if you have a bank Rolodex of contacts. So definitely reach out if you're interested in that role. Anyone that's listening.
Thanks. Yeah, I think that there are companies that have opportunities in the US market. Of course, we are seeing a lot of action in the cross border payments and remittances space, which is logic. I think it's like that's a space that is very hot right now, and I think that will grow a lot in the upcoming years. I think that then definitely there's a lot that it's been done in the infrastructure space. Not just banking APIs, also stable coins, for instance. I think it's very, very hot. A lot of opportunity around that, which I think is great. And then I would say that um, I don't think anyone from LATAM has tackled the lending space in the US, though I believe that there might be opportunities, especially in the Spanish speaking, in the Latino based population. I think that there might be opportunities in which there's data in LATAM that you can process in order to provide better options for that particular population, and like revenue based scoring, revenue based lending. I think that that's an interesting space as well, and there's a lot that can be built around that.
Yeah, I totally agree. Like, I lived in New York for 7 years, went to Mexico and for 18 months, and came back, and it's like I don't exist as a person. And to try and get approved for the apartment that I live in, I had to get a guarantor. So I think that there's definitely opportunity in the US for different types of underwriting for foreigners. Um, Great. Well, we're actually at time already. That went really fast. But we're going
We
to
have a
end
lot
on
to
the fine.
chat about.
We did. We had a lot.
Yeah.
I'm going to end on the final fun question that I ask all the guests. So, what is your favorite book? Firstly, personal, and it can be fiction or nonfiction, and then a professional one.
Okay. So there's one which I think is personal but also professional, which I love. Is from a Chilean scientist, neuroscientist, which is called Humberto Maturana. The book is called, in Spanish, Del Ser al Hacer, which I would translate very polishly, like from being to doing, like something like that, but it doesn't translate as well. But basically, he studied, like, he was an epistemologist, so he studied like how do we as humans perceive everything, and how like everything is being perceived by someone, which is the body, like me through my body, I'm perceiving wherever it's outside. And so wherever it's outside is basically a proxy of me, you know? And so, like, being able to understand your own knowledge processes and being self-aware about how is that you are thinking, for me has been transformational. Like, I've, for instance, always struggled to exercise, like, historically. And since, like, I understood, like, the impact that it had in my body and in how, like, I would face the rest of the day mentally, from a mental perspective, like, I exercise a lot, and so, like, from that small things, to actually being much more aware of your own thinking path. And so, like, I love it. And then I always read a lot of poetry. I love poetry. And I'm particularly fond right now of an Argentinian poet, which is called Roberto Juarros. And so I would recommend a little bit of poetry from Roberto Juarros, and then a little bit of Chilean epistemologist, this Chilean epistemologist, Humberto Maturana. Very Latin based.
Very LATAM based, very fitting, and I totally agree with like the science behind that book. Our thoughts become our reality, and it's like scientifically proven that exercising can completely shift your mood, and something that I've been getting into like religiously doing yoga every day, and it's totally made significant changes in my life. Great. Well, thank you so much, Ximena. It was lovely to have you. And thank you to all the listeners of the This Month in Fintech podcast. You can listen to our podcast wherever you get your podcasts, Spotify, um, Apple, etc. And please subscribe and like. That would be really helpful for us. Great. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Sasha. Bye bye.